It has become standard recently for all the coaster enthusiasts to gaze in awe every time there's a new POV of an RMC coaster, and it's happened again. The Iron Gwazi POV is finally here, and Busch Gardens had quite a lot of fun of teasing this. And wow, it is good. I've previously made a POV comparison video against Zadra for this coaster, and that was just something for me to upload while I make a full analysis, and I will be comparing it to Zadra later, but first I'm going to talk about the ride itself. So it should open next year, if Busch Gardens actually pay for it. But anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to get on with it. So first thing, I'm going to talk through the POV in real time, and then I'm going to break down the individual elements. I'm going to talk about it as a whole, and then I'm going to compare it to some other RMC coasters. So the coaster starts with the 206 foot tall climb up the lift hill into the steepest drop on a hybrid roller coaster, that's 91 degrees, and I think the height is 206 foot tall, so that is also the tallest and fastest hybrid. So it starts off with a drop very similar but just a tiny bit taller than Zadra and Steel Vengeance. So then it goes down this huge drop, and then there's no bunny hop as it goes straight up into a huge outer bank which is very solid and strong. Then it goes and starts to bank back up before you get flung down into a barrel roll and go down to the floor. It then goes up into a big overbank and you get flung out and into this before you go into a huge massive outward banking wave turn. You then go up into a big airtime hill into a little wave turn and then drop down with a 0G stall. It then banks around the corner and you get an off-axis hill and then into another turn into a trick track double down. You then go around the corner, up into another small airtime hill, and then bank fast into the brakes. Now, this ride has lots of elements in a short duration with loads of airtime, as you would expect from an RMC. The overall speed this was taken when testing looked very fast. Of course, the mounted POV is going to make it look like it's going maybe a little bit faster than it actually is, but I think the speed still is very fast, and although these mounted POVs do make these RMCs look like they're going very fast, these coasters are going very fast, so I think it is still fair to judge the speed off that. So I'm going to take a more in-depth look at each individual element. The drop, again, as I just said, it's nothing really different to Zadra or Steel Vengeance. It's a tiny bit steeper, but I don't really think you're going to feel that. You go down and there's quite a few head choppers. There's no speed hill though, and I think they only put them in to kind of space the ride out more, and it's just to do with fitting it in and that kind of thing, so that's not really a big thing to note. And then you go up into the huge outer bank. Now what's interesting with this one is that it kind of starts banking normally into a turn or an overbank and then flips out into an outer bank. I think this looks very good because there's going to be a lot of cool twisted airtime on the way in, and I think especially on the front that's going to be very good because you're going to get pushed over that fast transition. The airtime strength is quite typical for an RMC outer bank like this, so similar to that huge outer bank on Steel Vengeance, but then of course it will probably have that powerful airtime as it takes a bigger transition into it. After turning down and heading under the structure, it then goes up into the next element. And this is the downwards barrel roll. So it first heads up and then banks quite highly round a tight turn at the top, and then it has a very snappy transition down into the barrel roll. It keeps a good speed throughout and it twists quite quickly actually. There's not really much like this on any other coaster because you could compare it to some of the other RMC barrel roll drops, but I think this is going to feel very different because they're off the lift hill and it's going very slow. This is obviously going very fast, so there's going to be quite a lot of positives before you go into it, and you're also going to get airtime on that transition into it as well. It probably will feel quite similar to Untamed's 720 degree corner stall. Say that because I think once you're actually in the barrel roll you're just going to get some sustained floater airtime and hang time because RMC actually managed to do that. And again, I really do like the look of the snappy transition at the top because from the POV it has highlighted that this is going to be a lot quicker and probably going to have a lot more airtime than it initially looked like from off-ride. Back row is definitely the place where you want to go on this element. And next we've got probably the most intense moment on the ride, which is a large overbank turn. Interestingly, with this overbank turn, it does look like the transitions could give you a little bit of airtime. The first transition into the banking for it maybe not so much, but I think the second one on the way down definitely has that kind of shaping to it where it might produce some cool airtime. So after some intensity and maybe an unexpected pop of airtime, it heads down to the front of the ride where it has the element that everyone's going to see, which is that huge wave turn that it outward banks into. So when you turn into it, you get pushed into your seat before getting flipped out onto the outside of the turn. And that is a very whippy transition, and it is going to be very similar to Zadra, which I'm going to talk about later. There's two impressive things with this element. The first is just the duration that it actually holds you in that position for. It is a very long wave turn, especially for the one where you twist over the top to go into it, rather than one in the style of lightning rod. And the second thing with this is that it does look to have quite a tight radius to the curve that makes it outward banks, which means you probably are going to get pushed up and out of your seat quite a lot. And honestly, I don't think there's many better moments on a roller coaster than this on the planet. So after heading out of this element, you go up in the style of a double up before turning into another mini wave turn. This moment of airtime is going to catch a lot of people off because it's very hard to spot and it just comes out of nowhere. I honestly think this is going to be such a great moment of the ride because it reminds me of a similar thing that it does on Hakuge, except that does it in reverse. I don't know what it is that I just really like the look of in this element. I think it's just the way you're going sideways on a turn and then suddenly you're popping the other way to get airtime, and you just get that flow of airtime. It's just cool. It's going to create some very good pacing. So after this, you head around into a small 0G stall. And what I think is very good about this is the positioning of it. The reason I think this is very well positioned is because you come down out of that outer bank, probably get a pop of airtime off of it, and then you go into the huge wave turn, crazy airtime, and then pop up into that double up wave turn combination. So that part of the ride, there's going to be a very fast pace, lots of elements coming at you quickly, and then the 0G stall, after all of that, very quickly turns all of that airtime and crazy pacing into just a split second where you're completely still, no forces, upside down, gently resting on the lap bar. But it also has a short length, which I think is good because, you know, you've got this crazy pacing and you want to give just an unexpected break, and that works, but it doesn't stop for too long and it manages to keep on going and pull out before you get time to relax. Now we get a nice, very classic RMC section, which I think is very cool. You go into a small off-axis hill, go around the corner, and then into a trick trap double down kind of thing. Two off-axis hills taking you down. It's an RMC, it's going to be very strong. You then get taken round the corner into a final airtime pop, and then you bank very hard into the brake run. The frequency of airtime pops here is very good, and I love that classic just RMC-ness, how they've managed to fit that on a coaster like this. But I think maybe towards the end there might be a little bit of a lack of positives. I don't know. Really, I think we're going to have to see how it rides because it's hard to judge that at the moment. So that's the layout. There's a lot to take in to pack into what is a pretty short layout. It's only actually 46 seconds long from the top of the lift hill to the brakes, and that isn't very long. The fact that they managed to fit the huge powerful elements and the classic RMC moments on a fairly short, huge coaster pretty seamlessly is something that I admire quite a lot. The best element on this ride is really a competition between the barrel roll, the huge wave turn, and that first huge crazy outward banked airtime hill. And then for the less exciting parts, there might be a lack of intensity in places, but I really think that's hard to judge off the POV. The airtime strength is usually fairly easy to guess whereabouts it's going to be, but intensity is just really difficult. Now after seeing this, I think the big question is Iron Gwazi better than Zadra? Because they are very similar. They were probably designed at very similar times. Some things suggest that Iron Gwazi might have even been designed before Zadra, but they are a very similar size to within 1 foot of height and a very similar length within about a second of each other. And they were both pretty much ground up RMCs, because although Iron Gwazi was built on some of the structure of the original Gwazi roller coaster, RMC say only 15% of the ride structure is from the original ride, and you can see that when you look at the video because there's a lot of new wood. Anyway, so there's some elements on these two coasters that we can compare pretty closely. First would be the drop. There's really not much to say there, they're pretty much the same. Iron Gwazi turns a bit, Zadra has more head choppers. Then they go down, and Iron Gwazi doesn't have the speed hill that Zadra has, but again, that's a pretty minor thing. Now then, they both go up into a large turnaround. Both of them have outward banking. Now Zadra banks up and turns around a lot before it goes into the outward banks bit, because Zadra pretty much turns 180 degrees before it flips you out outward banking for the drop. Iron Gwazi's element is actually a lot more similar than it looks, because it basically does the same thing as Zadra, but comes out a little bit earlier, because it does start to go into a little bit of an overbank sort of element before it banks out. So when we look at it this way, Iron Gwazi's first outward bank turnaround element is basically a better version of Zadra's, where you spend less time under positive force turning around and more time doing the same thing but banked outwards, getting some crazy airtime. After this, they both have a very large inversion. Zadra has its absolutely huge 0G stall, and Iron Gwazi has that downwards barrel roll. I would say Iron Gwazi's barrel roll keeps a lot better pace than the 0G stall on Zadra, because by doing this element the forces kind of change more. Also, you could pretty comfortably compare this to Zadra's first turnaround, because it's basically that, but a barrel roll instead of an outward bank on the way down. Now Zadra's 0G stall looks amazing. If I was going to be really picky to try determine what out of that stall and Iron Gwazi's barrel roll is better, I would say Zadra's stall is maybe a bit early in the ride, because ideally you want to have a stall as a bit of a break to all the forces, and Zadra's is very early on in the ride. That is a really tiny detail, but it's just what I'm going to say. You know, Iron Gwazi adds a twist literally to the 0G moment, because I'm guessing that that downwards barrel roll is going to give 0G. And as well as this, Iron Gwazi does manage to include a shorter 0G stall later, which I've already explained why I think it helps keep the pace. If you were to directly compare these two 0G stalls, they're both good for different reasons. You know, as I said, Iron Gwazi's does more for the pacing, but Zadra's is a more impressive overall element, because that 0G stall is huge, it's taken with loads of speed, and while you're upside down, you're really high in the air. Now we can compare both rides' outer bank wave turns. Both of these start turning into it, then bank out the other way, and then Iron Gwazi carries straight on and Zadra turns it again back the way it came. Now they are very similar, but the small details that are different is that Zadra, both on the way in and the way out, is a bit more banked, so it has to have more rotation to get to the 90 degrees, and it does that in about the same time or faster than Iron Gwazi does it. So that means that Zadra has much more violent transitions on the way in and on the way out. So Iron Gwazi's transitions in and out aren't going to be quite as ridiculously violent as Zadra's are, but Iron Gwazi is going to hold you in that sideways position for a little bit longer. This is really hard to tell, but it does look like Iron Gwazi has a bit more curvature to the wave turn as well, which means it should give a bit more force to the airtime while you are held there. Really, I think out of these, if you're going to pick a winner, it's really down to preference, whether you want to be violently whipped into it or whether you want to be held out of your seat longer. And what each of these do best, they do really well. So overall, Zadra's layout has many more powerful individual elements than Iron Gwazi's does, and Zadra is more about intensity. Having said that, Iron Gwazi manages to seemingly pack more elements into the same ride duration, and therefore has a bit of a more fast-paced layout. I thought Iron Gwazi was going to have quite a few more airtime moments than Zadra does, but actually It only has about 12 airtime moments, where Zadra has 11, so it's about the same. And Iron Gwazi has roughly 15 seconds of airtime versus Zadra's roughly 13. Zadra has more inversions, but I don't think that necessarily makes it better because we're talking about RMC Hybrid coasters here, so I'm not really going to talk about that. Now, the question of which is better, quite a lot of people said in the comments for the little comparison video I did that they thought Zadra was the better coaster, which is interesting because it is the older one. Do I agree with that? I'm going to be truthful. I think Iron Gwazi is better for the reasons stated, that it manages to seamlessly blend a bigger variety of elements, and because I do like that classic RMC feeling that Iron Gwazi seems to have more of. Obviously, you are perfectly free to disagree with that, because really we're talking about two very similar coasters and two of the absolute best roller coasters in the world, so there is really not much else different. To try talk about which is better with these coasters, I've had to go really far in depth, and that just tells you how close the difference is between these two. We could also compare Iron Gwazi to the other two huge RMCs that are considered some of the absolute best roller coasters in the world, Hakuge and Steel Vengeance. I find it really hard to place Hakuge because it's interesting, it's just difficult to rank. Steel Vengeance, however, I still think it is better than Iron Gwazi, and people do consider Steel Vengeance to be the best roller coaster in the world, but I think this is purely just because of the length. Steel Vengeance is a ridiculously long ride. If it lasted the same amount of time as Iron Gwazi does, I think Iron Gwazi would be the better ride. Obviously, feel free to put your opinion in the comments. I think a lot of you have already given your opinions on the last one, but given that you've heard my full thoughts on this, what do you think? I hope that you enjoyed my deep, nerdy analysis, and is there anything else you've spotted that I haven't talked about? I do like to purely analyse ride experience and forces, so it will be really interesting to see if people pick out any of these things that I've said when the ride opens next year. It's going to be an amazing addition to Busch Gardens. I think I was never really drawn that much to Florida before they announced this insane coaster and Velocicoaster that's going to be opening at Universal next year. So now they've got those two amazing thrill coasters, I really want to go there. But I'm going to shut up because, I mean, how much do people really care about me going into really nerdy detail about coaster POVs? Probably not enough to warrant however long this video is. So just go and enjoy your life and stop spending time worrying about which of the best coasters on the planet is slightly better than the other.